The annual Maritime Festival was the highlight of our small coastal town's social calendar, celebrating our heritage as a haven for sailors, fishermen, and all souls drawn to the sea. This year, to mark the centennial of the Siren's Lament tragedy, a shipwreck shrouded in mystery and superstition, the committee decided to retrieve its bell from the depths as a memorial. As a professional diver and a local history enthusiast, I was eager to be involved. The dive itself was uneventful, almost disappointingly so. The bell, encrusted with barnacles and swathed in seaweed, seemed nothing more than a relic of wrought iron and salt corrosion. We brought it ashore amid cheers and camera flashes, oblivious to the old-timers who shook their heads and muttered about bad omens. The bell was placed on display in the town square, intended to be the centerpiece of the festival. But strange incidents began almost immediately. First, it was small accidents, slip-ups in the kitchen of the main diner that led to a fire, a sudden collapse of the old pier during a photo shoot, minor events that could be brushed off as coincidences, or the town's aging infrastructure. But then, tragedy struck. A local child, drawn to the bell by its lure, was found drowned in the marina under mysterious circumstances. The town grieved, and whispers of a curse began to circulate, fueled by the old stories of the bell's discovery on a ship that had sailed despite forewarnings of a storm. As the festival drew near, my unease grew. I revisited the dive footage, poring over every frame that featured the bell, searching for something, anything that might explain the unease that gnawed at my insides. Unable to shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that should have remained lost, I began my own investigation into the history of the Siren's Lament. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered about the ship's ill-fated last voyage. It had been carrying a cargo much darker than the historical record suggested, stolen artifacts rumored to be cursed. One night, driven by a restless need for answers, I went to the town square to examine the bell again. It was then that I noticed an inscription previously hidden by the barnacles we'd carelessly cleaned away. "Whomsoever wakes the deep, so too shall they sleep." The festival was in full swing, the town square bustling with locals and tourists alike, when the bell began to toll. It rang out clear and sharp, not from the touch of any hand, for it swung gently of its own accord. Panic ensued as the ground trembled slightly, enough to be felt but not enough to be believed. In the chaos, I watched helplessly as the people nearest the bell collapsed, one by one, their bodies crumpled and cold by the time I reached them. The curse was real, and we had invited it into our midst with open arms. The aftermath was a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and the muted sobbing of a town in mourning. The bell was quickly removed and taken back to the sea, dropped into the deepest trench we could find, but the damage had been done. As I write this, the town tries to recover from the shadow of that day, but some stains do not wash clean. I left the ocean behind, haunted by the tolling of a bell that should have remained silent. My nights are filled with dreams of dark waters, and I wonder if the sea is calling me back, one last time, to settle the debt we incurred when we woke the deep. The weeks following the festival were heavy with a palpable sorrow that draped over the town like a thick fog. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of the disaster, the floral tributes piling up around the now empty town square, the shuttered windows of homes that had lost loved ones, and the vacant stares of my neighbors. The tragedy had bound us in a collective state of mourning, and in every whispered conversation, I sensed a blame that no one dared direct at me, yet I felt it deeply. I attended the funerals, a silent observer in the back rows, the weight of each ceremony heavier than the last. The words spoken by the grieving families echoed in my mind, replaying over sleepless nights. "If only," became the refrain of my thoughts, a loop of regret and self-reproach. Unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere of the town, I sought solace where I had always found it before, beneath the waves. Diving had once been my escape, the underwater world a place of peace and quiet, away from the noise above. Now, it became a quest for atonement. I returned to the site where we had originally found the bell. The sea floor was undisturbed, the marine life seemingly oblivious to the human tragedies linked to the objects that lay beneath their domain. I wondered if the sea had forgiven us for our intrusion, for waking it from its slumber, or if the deep held grudges, as long as it held wrecks. During one dive, I found remnants of other items from the siren's lament, scattered and half-buried. Each piece was a testament to the lives that had been intertwined with the ship, and now, by extension, to the lives lost during the festival. I documented them meticulously, hoping to preserve their stories, even if I could not redeem them. My dives became longer, my time on land shorter. The sea was both my refuge and my penance. It was during one of these extended underwater excursions that I discovered something unsettling: a series of carvings on an underwater rock formation near the wreck site. They were not natural erosions, but deliberate marks, etched deep into the stone, symbols that mirrored the inscription on the bell. This revelation was a chilling reminder that the bell's curse might not have been an isolated lore, but part of a larger, darker history that I had yet to understand. I took photographs, intending to research them, to dig deeper into the maritime legends that might explain them. But part of me dreaded the answers I might find, fearful of uncovering more truths that would further shatter our already broken town. Armed with the photographs of the underwater carvings, I approached a university professor specializing in maritime folklore. His analysis confirmed my fears. The symbols were known among ancient seafaring cultures to signify a warning, a protective measure against disturbing slumbering depths. The bell was not just a commemorative artifact, it was a guardian, the professor explained. Its removal was likely seen as a violation, a breach of an ancient pact made to keep the peace between the land and the sea. This knowledge did not bring the relief I had hoped for. Instead, it compounded the guilt, making the weight I carried heavier. I had removed the guardian, and in doing so, I had failed not only my town, but also the very traditions that had been established to protect it. As the anniversary of the disaster approached, the town planned a quiet ceremony to honor the memory of those we had lost. I watched from a distance, my presence a reminder of the cause, too painful for many to bear. In the end, I left the town, my home no longer a place of comfort, but a mausoleum of memories best left undisturbed. I moved inland, away from the call of the sea, hoping to find peace in the anonymity of a bustling city. But sometimes, late at night, I hear a distant tolling, the sound of a bell ringing deep beneath the waves, and I know that some pasts are too profound to ever truly leave behind. They echo through our lives, a reminder of the depths we must all face, whether in the sea or in ourselves. Story 2. The drive to the village was a descent into an older world. As modern landscapes gave way to gnarled trees and fog-laden paths, my skepticism mingled with an unshakable anticipation. The village appeared through the mist like a scene from a bygone era, with its cobblestone streets and lantern-lit homes. I introduced myself as a journalist to the local innkeeper, a wiry woman named Mrs. Elwood, who regarded me with a curious mix of wariness and resignation. "You're here for the woods," she stated more than asked, her voice tinged with a faint disapproval. "Yes, I'm here to gather stories about the Whispering Woods," I confirmed, setting down my bag and retrieving my voice recorder and notebook. Mrs. Elwood sighed, handing me the key to my room. "Just stories, I hope," she said, her eyes holding mine for a moment longer than comfortable. "Remember, some stories don't like to be disturbed." My first evening in the village was spent at the local tavern, where the warmth of the fire was a stark contrast to the chill of the tales shared by the villagers. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of the Whispering Woods legend. They spoke of figures seen between the trunks, of laughter that bubbled up from the roots, of loved ones who responded to a familiar voice only to be swallowed by the forest's dense embrace. I recorded everything, each click of the recorder slicing through the crackle of the hearth. My rational mind told me there were explanations, echoes, animal sounds, the simple tricks of an isolated environment on the human psyche. Yet, the consistency of the stories began to gnaw at me. "You planning to go there?" asked an old man with eyes as gray as the fog outside. "I am," I replied, my voice steady despite the growing knot of apprehension. "Then be wary of the voices. he warned. Don't let curiosity lead you beyond where the lanterns cast light. The next morning, armed with my recorder and a healthy dose of skepticism, I ventured into the woods. The trees stood like sentinels, ancient and imposing, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. I walked the marked paths, stopping occasionally to capture the sounds of the woods, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves, the ambiguous whispers that could easily be mistaken for one's name. It was as I approached the heart of the woods that I heard it, a whisper, unmistakably calling, Michael, my name, carried on a breeze that seemed to materialize from nowhere. My heart raced, my original intent to debunk the myths clashing violently with the visceral fear that urged me to flee. Michael, the voice called again, closer this time, its tone achingly familiar. Against every instinct, I pressed the record button on my device, my voice shaky as I narrated what I was experiencing. The voice uses my name. It sounds like... But I couldn't finish. The familiarity of the voice paralyzed me. It was my own voice. Hours passed, or had it been minutes? Time seemed a malleable concept within the confines of the whispering boughs. I wandered, the voice leading me deeper, always just out of sight, the ground beneath my feet becoming softer, the air colder. My recordings became my only anchor to reality, each entry more disjointed than the last. I heard my name again, followed it. It's getting dark. The path isn't clear. I can't find my way back. When I stumbled upon a clearing, the sky had turned a bruised purple, the trees around me closing in like a dark cathedral. Exhausted and disoriented, I collapsed, the recorder slipping from my hand. They found me the next morning, miles from any recognized path, clutching my recorder like a lifeline. Mrs. Elwood was part of the search party, her expression a mix of relief and I told you so. Back at the inn, as I tried to make sense of my recordings, I realized the last entries were blank, filled only with static. But one clip was different. It was my own voice, calling out from the woods, not in fear but in an eerie, inviting whisper. Michael, come back. I left the village that day, the recordings a chilling reminder of my encounter. The story I had come to write remained unfinished, shadowed by the whispers of the woods that might have been my own. Back in the city, the confines of my apartment felt both suffocating and safe after the expanse of the whispering woods. The recordings I brought back with me lay on my desk, a haunting pile of digital tapes that seemed to pulsate with a life of their own. I avoided them for days, diving into mundane tasks and meeting deadlines for articles that had nothing to do with haunted forests or folklore. Yet, the whisper that was my own voice lingered in the back of my mind, a constant, unshakable shadow. Despite my reluctance, I knew I needed to confront the recordings. With a deep breath, I played them again, the sound of my own voice in the woods filling the room, chilling the air despite the warmth of the afternoon sun streaming through my windows. Each entry, leading up to those moments of static, was a step back into the forest, a step toward something I still couldn't fully understand. Determined to seek some form of closure, I contacted a professor of folklore at the local university, Dr. Helen Marrow, an expert in oral traditions and supernatural beliefs. Over coffee, I shared my experiences and played the recordings. Her fascination was evident, her eyes widening with academic curiosity as she listened to the eerie echoes of my voice calling myself back. This is remarkable, she said, pausing the playback. It's rare to capture such phenomena. But more than that, it's compelling how it mirrors the self, like facing a part of your psyche that's normally veiled. Her words struck a chord. Was the forest merely reflecting my own fears and doubts, or had I tapped into something universally primal, a fear embedded in our collective unconscious? Dr. Marrow suggested a return to the village, this time with more preparation and support. There's more to uncover, and perhaps confronting it head-on, with the lens of research and documentation, might provide the answers you seek, she proposed. Weeks later, armed with better equipment and accompanied by Dr. Marrow, I found myself on the threshold of the Whispering Woods once again. The village seemed unchanged, frozen in time, but my perception of it had shifted. I felt a strange kinship with the place. a mixture of dread and respect. We set up audio stations around different parts of the forest, hoping to capture the phenomenon from multiple angles. As night fell, the familiar sense of unease crept back, the forest seemingly alive with whispered secrets. Then, just as before, my name floated through the trees. This time, it was Dr. Marrow who heard it too. "Michael," the voice called, a whisper on the wind that made every hair on my body stand on end. "It's calling you," Dr. Marrow whispered, her voice steady but filled with awe. "Respond." And I did. "I'm here," I called back, breaking the rule I had set for myself on my first visit. The woods were silent for a moment, and then, all around us, the whispers began. A chorus of voices, some familiar, others foreign, all calling back. The night passed with recordings that would later be analyzed, revealing layers of sounds that defied simple explanations. Voices layered upon the wind, some perhaps just tricks of nature, others uncomfortably articulate. The experience changed my perspective on the stories we tell about places like the Whispering Woods. They are not just tales to frighten children or to entertain tourists. They are perhaps reflections of our deeper selves, our fears, and our histories woven into the very fabric of the landscape. Dr. Marrow and I left the village with hours of footage and a report that would later be published in several academic journals, discussing the psychological and environmental factors that might contribute to the phenomenon. But for me, the journey was more personal. I had confronted my own whisper in the woods, and though I still felt a chill when I thought about that voice calling me back, I understood that it was not just calling me, it was a part of me. Now, years later, I sometimes wonder about the power of such places and the stories they hold. The recordings are locked away, occasionally brought out for lectures or discussions, a testament to the journey into a folklore that blurred the lines between reality and myth. The Whispering Woods no longer haunt my dreams, but they remain with me, a reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding, waiting in the quiet places of the world. It's these mysteries that still call to me, in the hushed tones of the night, urging me to listen, to return, to understand just a little more of the unknown. Story 3. Shadefield was the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while driving past. Nestled between sprawling farms and thick woods, it was a town wrapped in whispers and wary glances. I arrived under the guise of a travel writer, but my true purpose was to dig into the phenomenon of the vanishing hitchhiker, an apparition reported by dozens, dismissed by many, feared by a silent few. At the local diner, I set up my first interviews, posing questions that were met with curt nods or pointed silences. It wasn't until I met old Mrs. Larkin, the diner's owner, that the story began to take shape. "Route 29? She paused, her eyes narrowing. "We don't talk about that much around here. Bad for the heart, worse for the soul." Undeterred, I ventured further, collecting tales of those who claimed to have seen the hitchhiker. Each account was eerily similar. A young man drenched from the rain, thumbing for a ride at the bend near Harper's Creek. Each story ended the same. He would get into the vehicle, strike up idle conversation, and then, just as the car passed the old Harper plantation, vanish from the passenger seat without a trace. Intrigued and a little unnerved, I dug into the archives at the local library. There, buried in microfilm, was the piece that sparked the legend. A hit and run on Route 29 some 30 years ago. The victim? A young man named Tommy Harper, heir to the plantation that now lay in ruins. With Tommy Harper's name in hand, I approached the subject with renewed vigor. My inquiries led me to the Harpers, once a prominent family now shrouded in scandal and economic decline. I met with James Harper, the current patriarch, who received me with a blend of Southern hospitality and barely concealed disdain. Tommy's death was a tragedy, one that nearly broke our family, he confessed after a stiff drink. But dredging up old ghosts won't bring him back. Yet, it wasn't the conversation but the documents I found in his study, left out perhaps by mistake, that caught my eye. Old police reports, a hastily withdrawn lawsuit, and a series of threatening letters that suggested the hit and run was no accident, but a deliberate act buried by the town's elite. Fueled by the discovery, I took to Route 29 myself one stormy evening, recorder in hand, hoping to capture anything that might lend credence to the tales. As I drove, the rain thrummed against the windshield, a staccato beat that seemed to echo the rising dread within me. Then, just as I approached Harper's Creek, the silhouette of a man appeared by the roadside, thumb extended. Heart in my throat, I stopped the car. The hitchhiker slid into the passenger seat, his presence real and solid. Yet when I turned to ask his name, the seat was empty, and the recorder captured only the sound of the storm. Shaken, I continued driving, but soon realized I was no longer alone in the car. The recorder played back the conversation I never had, with a voice that wasn't mine asking questions that never left my lips. Confusion turned to horror as the car seemed to drive itself, steering me inexorably toward the old Harper plantation. When they found my car the next morning abandoned by the roadside, the back door was open, the recorder lying on the passenger seat. The last entry was my own voice, a whisper barely audible over the sound of the storm. "Why did you come back, Tommy?" No trace of me was ever found, just the recordings, the last of which are still played by those who search for the truth about Route 29, a road that keeps its secrets, a legend that lives on. The recordings I left behind became the talk of Shadefield, each play stirring more whispers and fear among the locals. My disappearance wasn't just another incident. It was a validation of the decades-old legend that many had tried to forget. The Harper family, in particular, found themselves under scrutiny once again, the suspicions and the old stories resurfacing like ghosts that refused to rest. In the weeks that followed, an investigative team from a neighboring city took interest. Armed with my recordings and the documents I had unearthed, they began to peel back layers of the town's facade, discovering connections and cover-ups that went deeper than anyone had imagined. The Harpers, once the pillars of the community, were revealed to have wielded their power to silence many, including the true circumstances surrounding Tommy's death. As the investigation deepened, more stories came to light, tales of other hitchhikers, all linked to the Harpers in some way, who had vanished over the years. Each story added weight to the legend, turning folklore into a horrific pattern of reality. The town, compelled by the weight of the new evidence, could no longer deny or dismiss the truth. Amidst the turmoil, someone found a diary belonging to Tommy Harper in the attic of the old plantation house. The diary contained entries that chronicled his fear of his own family, his plans to expose their corrupt deeds, and his love for a girl from the wrong side of the tracks, a relationship his family vehemently opposed. His final entry was hauntingly prophetic. "If you're reading this, then I'm probably gone, and they've decided I'm more useful as a ghost than as a son." The revelation sparked a town-wide reckoning. The Harpers were arrested, and the case reopened to investigate the long history of mysterious disappearances. The diary and the recordings were critical pieces of evidence, used in court to demonstrate the extent of the family's influence and the lengths they went to protect their secrets. As the trials proceeded, Shadefield transformed. The town square, once overshadowed by the legend of the Whispering Woods, became a place for vigils and memorials for those who had vanished. The woods themselves were no longer feared but became a somber place of reflection, a monument to the memories of the lost. While justice seemed to prevail, the fate of the journalist who vanished, my fate, remained a mystery that continued to haunt the town. The last recording, my voice mingling with Tommy's supposed ghost, became a chilling reminder of the thin line between legend and reality. Every year on the anniversary of my disappearance, locals gather by Route 29, playing the recordings and leaving lanterns by the roadside in memory of both Tommy and the journalist who brought his story to light. It is a ritual born of tragedy, but steeped in the community's newfound commitment to remembering rather than forgetting. Though I never returned to tell the tale myself, the impact of my investigation lingered, a legacy carved into the heart of Shadefield. The Whispering Woods no longer whispered of hauntings, but spoke loud tales of redemption and mourning, of secrets unearthed and lives remembered. And somewhere in the echoes of those woods, if you listen closely, you might still hear a journalist asking questions, A young man planning his escape, their voices intertwined forever with the wind that sweeps down Route 29, carrying stories that are no longer just whispers in the dark.